Well, I just want to ask two questions to get us thinking this morning, and they might seem to be a little bit odd, but bear with me. So the first question is, I wonder how you might describe your life journey as a Christian. Now, for some of you, as you look back, some may look back a little bit further than others, but to that point where you understood something of what it means to be a Christian, how might you describe your life journey? And the second question is, I wonder, if someone had to write a eulogy for you, what would you want for it to say? If someone had to write a eulogy for you, what would you want for it to say? Now, I know they seem to be quite an odd couple of questions, but as the church today remembers the lives of Peter and Paul, the apostles, and as we, drawing from the reading which Ruth read for us from 2 Timothy, as we focus upon Paul today, so I just want us to see how Paul not only reminds Timothy of what the Christian life was like, but in those words, in that letter that Paul writes, he's coming to the end of his life. He knows that he's soon to be martyred by Nero. And so he's reflecting back, and his words act in some way as a eulogy upon his life. And for us today, as we celebrate and remember the lives of Peter and Paul, so may we be both challenged and encouraged to think about how we should live our lives, but also what we should expect that life, the Christian life, to be like. And as we look at the reading from 2 Timothy, so we see how Paul's words, in a way, encompass and respond to or answer those two questions that I started with. And so I'll try and sort of tease out so we can look at them one at a time. And so as we think about the question, how might you describe your Christian life? We see how Paul describes his in words that are active. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have held on to the faith. Paul describes, he expects the Christian life to be in terms that are active, energetic, sometimes confrontational, always underpinned with confidence in God. It's certainly not the easy life, but as has been said, this is always the way with commitment to a larger cause. Now, here's an interesting quote, and you might like to think who may have said this. We will not accept into membership anyone with any reservations whatsoever. We will not accept into our membership unless that one is an active, disciplined, working member in one of our organizations. Now, it's interesting. It was Lenin who said that as sort of when he thought about Communist Party membership. And if we read through the Gospels, we would see that Jesus says, albeit slightly more succinct, something very similar. Jesus said, take up your cross and follow me. The call to Christian living is a call to be different, to stand up, to stand out, and to make a difference. It's a call to live out what we often hear termed as kingdom values, which by their very nature are countercultural. And this is what Paul, as he comes to the end of his life, is saying to Timothy as he is at the beginning of his Christian life. Following Jesus may well be difficult, but even so, remain faithful to the Lord, live the life he has called you to live, and do not be ashamed. I wonder how we might describe our life journey as a Christian. Dynamic, moving, purposeful, challenging, rewarding, sometimes difficult, underpinned with faith. I wonder. As we consider the apostles Peter and Paul, we today are reminded, we're encouraged, we're challenged. Jesus never promised an easy life with him, but he did promise to always be with us in all things. So we shouldn't be surprised when our Christian life attracts opposition or disapproval. We need to remember that according to Luther and the Reformers, one of the marks of the true church was suffering. How would you describe your life as a Christian? And a helpful sort of rule of thumb as we look at Paul and his words here is what we see Paul doing is in a way, we could say Paul lives his life backwards. And it's helpful for us to think about this. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, the best way I think to describe it is to say that Paul looked forward to the very end, if you like, his goal, the crown of life, that receiving and hearing from God those words, "Well done, good and faithful servant." He looked forward to that eternity with God. That's what he looked for and he longed for. And knowing that, he then seeks to live his life today in light of that. And so he asks himself the question, does how I've lived today move me toward what I'm looking for and longing for then? Paul allowed the future, his future longing, to shape his present living. I wonder, as Christians today, what is it in our hearts? What is it that we look for and long for? And do we allow that to then shape our present living? And our second question, which was to do with our eulogy, I wonder if someone had to write a eulogy for your Christian life, what would you want for it to say? And again, as we look at that reading that Ruth brought to us, we see how Paul's words echo something of that for his life. Paul says, I have remained faithful to God's call. I have completed God's task for my life. Now, as we think about this question for ourselves, I'd like to finish with reading a really challenging poem called The Dash by Linda Ellis. And some of you may have heard it, I don't know. But it goes like this. I read of a man who stood to speak at the funeral of a friend. He referred to the dates on the tombstone from the beginning to the end. He noted how first came the date of the birth and went on to speak of the second with tears. But then he said what mattered most was the dash between those years. For that little line represents all the time they spent here on earth. And now only those who loved them know what that little line is worth. For it matters not how much we own, the cars, the house, the cash. What matters most is how we live and love and how we spend our dash. So think about this long and hard. Are there things you'd like to change? For you never know how much time is left that can still be rearranged. If we could slow down just enough to consider what's true and real and always try to understand the way other people feel, be less quick to anger and show appreciation more, and love the people in our lives like we've never loved before. If we treat each other with respect and more often wear a smile, remembering that this special dash might only last a while. So when your eulogy is being read with your life's actions to rehash, would you be proud of the things they say about how you spent your dash? Amen.